if anybody's going to watch this, but I was just watching the Wake Up and Win podcast that I've been following ever since the beginning of the Mike Bickle scandal at IHOP KC. And I just was looking for a reputable news source that I could follow that wasn't entirely skewed against IHOP, and yet I didn't fully trust what was coming out of IHOP KC's like their own words. Just seemed like they were trying to wait it out and cover it up a little bit, and that wasn't something I was respecting in that moment. Like, just come out with it. Just tell everyone, hey, there's a lot of heinous sin going on, and we're going to permanently separate ourselves from Mike right away. Anyway, no more about that. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of encouragement if you've been discouraged by what's going on at IHOP KC. I am in Colorado now, okay? I live in Colorado and I attend a Presbyterian church with my husband, which, let me tell you, is very different than the non-denominational churches we were used to attending. And there's good and bad in everything. Like, every church is going to have its weaknesses and its strengths. But the strengths of the Presbyterian model are high accountability for the pastorship. Like, anybody who's in leadership has a lot of stringent accountability from an outside eldership board and support from a worldwide denomination. So there are benefits to being in a denomination, even though I was almost always a part of a non-denominational church. I'm starting to realize that non-denominational churches, like, a part of the key to what makes them good or bad is whether the leadership decides to have accountability or not within their structure. Accountability cannot be one person who's your best friend who you're accountable to. That's not accountability on the multi-generational leadership level. If you are leading a church of 100 people even, and you are representing the spiritual leadership over a certain group of people, you need more accountability than one dude who happens to be your best friend. You need to be surrounded by peers who read the scripture and who are accountable to their own groups, but also you are held accountable to every single word and every single action that you display publicly, but also somebody needs to be checking in on you privately, not in a way that's unkind or revealing, but just so that you have personal accountability for your actions. So, little story. I went into church leadership after I had a few kids and I was in my 30s. My husband and I were asked to step into leadership for the youth group. And so we did that. My husband was a youth leader for 7 years and I was a youth leader for like 5. After about 5 years of youth leadership, I was asked to step into a new role as an evangelistic leader in the church. So I was supposed to be trained to evangelize to my generation, because the evangelistic model had not been updated in our church in probably 30 years, and no one even talked about evangelism in the church, which really bothered me because it's part of who I am, to talk to people and share about my life in God. It's just a part of who I am. And so they realized they wanted the fivefold ministry represented in the leadership of the church, and yet they didn't have anyone to represent evangelistic ministry. So one of the leaders was like, well, what about her? She's already doing youth ministry, but we could move her over to something else like evangelism or dance ministry. So they basically gave me my choice, and I chose evangelism. And then I started writing a curriculum because I couldn't find anything that resonated with me. So I just made my own, but I didn't want to just do this on my own. The first thing I said to leadership when I was going to start being a leader in ministry is, I will not do this unless I'm under your umbrella. I will not do this unless I have stringent accountability and a lot of support. And they said, well, duh. I was like, okay, good. So my pastor met with me, I think like 4 or 5 times to go over every single chapter of the curriculum I was making. And I wanted him to check it for validity with scripture. I wanted him to check it for just to make sure that everything in the curriculum was something that the entire church would stand for and stand behind me in. Also, I developed an accountability process where every single person who attended this 8-week course that I created would be given a survey, and they would fill out what they thought about the entire class. And they would send it anonymously to the pastor. He could decide if he wanted to share it with me or not.
That way they didn't feel bad if they had something negative to say about me. I wanted every single negative thing that every single person who went through my course experienced so that they could let Matt know, so that Matt could let me know. So I asked for accountability from the start because I didn't just want accountability, I wanted feedback, positive and negative, so that I could continue the course but improve upon it every time. So I did this course 2 different times, and all the feedback thankfully was pretty positive. But even if it was negative in little ways, which it was at times, I was able to use that to adapt my curriculum to make it even better for the next group of people. But after the second group, I realized we had a very low number of people who were interested in an 8-week commitment to evangelism. Nobody wanted to prioritize it because they'd have to come into the church one night a week for 2 hours. That's neither here nor there, but I figured let's adapt it. Let's change it to fit the body. So I talked to my pastor again and I said, I think I can make this into a workshop. 1-day workshop to empower people in evangelism in their lives, especially for people who are veteran Christians who have been serving God for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of serving God, but have fallen out of the habit of evangelism or have never really stepped into that because they were always pastors and teachers or apostles, but they never really tapped into their evangelistic side. So all that to say, it was awesome. I was so happy. I think there were like 10 people there, which was actually a pretty high number. It was 10% of our body at the time. And it was great. I got great feedback. And the moment we were done with the workshop, I had people walking up to me at church going, when is the next one? When is the next one? We want to do it. We've heard good things. And fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, that ministry ended right then. Not because of anything that I did or said or anything the pastors decided, but rather it was time for God to move my husband and I out of Kansas City altogether. So he called us to Colorado because my husband's father entered hospice in December of 2022. And I knew that we were going to move to Colorado. It was very clear. It wasn't convenient. It wasn't easy. We were very plugged into our church. Our house was great. Our city was great. The kids loved their school. It didn't make any sense financially, fiscally, or anything. But I knew that this was where God was calling us. And my husband knew this is where God was calling us. So January 1st, I started packing. By the end of January, Seth had a job in Colorado. And by the end of February, my entire family of 7 was living in Colorado with my in-laws to help care for my father-in-law, who, like I said, was in hospice. My mother-in-law just needed some help. She's very healthy and very capable, but after so long of caring for a husband with pulmonary fibrosis, she needed some help. She was getting tired. She was forgetting things. So we were there to support her in his hospice care 24/7. My husband had a job in Colorado. Thankfully, God gave him a good job so that he would be working roughly 40 to 45 hours a week. So I was in charge of helping mom care for dad 40 to 45 hours a week, in addition to having 2 small children at home because we still had a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old at that point. And then our older kids went immediately into public school. So we moved on a Friday and into Saturday, and my kids went to school, started school on Tuesday in their new school. So that's a little bit about me and my background and my history. Thank you for being here and joining me for my story. I'm going to continue to telling you guys pieces of my story and where I came from and what I'm about. Wake Up and Win has been instrumental in, I think, talking about abuse in a good way, which I know is a weird thing to say, but spiritual abuse happens, and there are lots of leaders in the church, especially evangelical, non-denominational churches, who literally get into leadership because it's an ego trip. I'm not saying that Mike was that, but I am saying that when you are shoved into leadership at a very, very young age, which Mike was, he basically started the church when he was 21, there is a higher propensity for falling because you don't have the maturity to handle what you're going through. You don't understand the importance of accountability yet because you're still a kid. And thirdly, you don't know how to balance family and ministry life because you don't even have a family yet. There were many times throughout Mike's ministry where his brother warned him that this is not good. People are getting hurt. People are getting run over. And he was warned by multiple people and multiple times, like, hey, something's not right here. Something about this ministry needs to slow down or reevaluate or have more accountability. And Mike basically ignored those warnings. And I think that there could have been a way for him to redeem himself. Oh, there's always a way for redemption, right? Because we're Christians. So if he had decided 20 years ago that, oh my gosh, I'm headed in a bad direction, or 30 years ago, I'm headed, or it's just heartbreaking, honestly, because I love Mike and I've cared about him and his family since I was a little child. And I don't want them to have to go through this. My heart breaks for Diane. My heart breaks for his kids and all the people who were in ministry for him, with him for decades, who didn't see it, you know? But that just goes to show that we're blinded by our own bias. And when it comes to ministry, you need to not be blinded by your own bias if you're in ministry, or if you're being the accountability for ministry team. Um, I don't know where God's going to lead me, whether I'm going to go back into ministry and actually get paid someday for it. Because I've always been, will never work in a church again aside from volunteering to clean up the tables, you know. I don't know what God has for me, but I do know that I learned a lot through Mike's example, however horrible and painful it has been to go through this. I've learned a lot from his example, and we can also learn a lot from David. I mean, David in the Bible basically had his best friend killed so he could get with his best friend's wife, and yet David was called a man after God's own heart, and yet David was one of the best leaders that humanity had to offer at the time, and yet he still failed. I mean, heck, the worship leader of heaven fell. One of Jesus's own mentored 12 disciples betrayed him. So this is not a news story. I think it's just shocking for the people who put Mike on such a high pedestal. And I hope that I don't do that with my current pastor or any other Christian leader, because if you put someone on a pedestal, they're bound to fall eventually, especially if they have hidden sin that they're trying to keep to themselves and not really tell anyone, and wake up every morning with new grace, trying to forget about the sin or shove it under the blanket or put it in a compartmentalized part of their life where they try to separate it, like this is its own thing and this is my real life, so this doesn't really count. It's not healthy, it's not good, and it's hurt young and old. So oh, I also wanted to encourage you guys. Nobody in my church has even heard of Mike Bickle. So while this feels very front and center and it's national news and all that, there are people all around the United States who have no clue about what he did or what happened or any of that. So I hope that's encouraging in some way. You can go to a random church somewhere and you won't hear anything about him, and that's okay. But I do think that some of the press it's getting is a good thing, because hopefully it will help change the evangelical church model. Hopefully it will help change non-denominational churches everywhere, because if leadership everywhere hears about this, they're like, oh shoot, they didn't even know for 23 years since IHOP began. Wow, maybe we should start talking to our pastors and saying, hey, do you have anything you're struggling with before it goes viral? I mean, yeesh. Yeah, the sweep under the rug thing, though, really upsets me. If someone has a secret sin as big as sexual abuse within the church, they need to be removed immediately. And yes, maybe they're repentant. Maybe they can go through therapy and all kinds of stuff. And maybe 10 years after that, maybe they'll be in a life group leader kind of situation. But oh my gosh, like seriously, everybody's sweeping it under the rug, ignoring it, pretending like it didn't happen. Nah, 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 or trying to believe it didn't happen. Guys, you gotta embrace reality. And it sucks and it's painful for anybody who's going through it. But thankfully, there's lots of churches all over the world who are not going through this. And if you need a little refuge, just go to a different church for a little while. Even if you decide to go back to IHOP, if you're currently going there, that's cool. But give yourself the time and space to heal, and don't force yourself to be in a situation that feels spiritually abusive, ever. Whether it's at IHOP or a different church, non-denominational or denominational, there are churches all over the nation right now who are going through this kind of shakeup. So no matter what church you go to, don't be afraid to switch churches for just a minute so that you can process and heal from what you've been through. And you can go back to your church if you love it, or you can stay there and be faithful and ride out the storm. That's cool too. But no one should be dictating to you what church you go to and how long you go there, or no one should be forcing you into leadership when you're not ready. Those kind of things are just warning signs. So, all right. God bless. If you watched this, please comment so that I know you watched it and tell me if it sucks. Because I want accountability. That was a joke. I mean, I do want accountability. That's not a joke, but yeah, never mind. Bye.